and then it kind of took on a life of its own. But the original impetus was satirical, but then also to kind of write a Rear Window, Death in Venice kind of combination where I was looking at these flashing lights across on Fifth Avenue because I was in Central Park West, and then imagining that these lights were flashing for this character, that there was some kind of Morse code from a damsel in distress across the way. Well, yeah, weird New York kind of rom-com idea, and then it took a nasty turn, and that was it. And then I just tried to figure out the entire history of humanity. 125 pages. I didn't know I was going to start this, so I'm going to hand it over to Chris because he's got actual things written down. Let me tell you, Chris, the fact that he has things written down should not be a surprise because Chris is the most meticulous. Should I tell that story about the widows and the orphans?
Yes, please.
You know what story it is? So, do you know what widows and orphans are in terms of writing? You do? Because I didn't know. Will you explain what it is? Because I think I get it wrong.
So, a widow or an orphan, you come to an end of the line, and if there is a word that goes on to the next line, one single word, that is an orphan. And the widow is the opposite of that.
A widow is if it's one word short.
One word short.
So if you have no widows and orphans, everything is a block. Like there's a block of text, there's an indentation for the paragraph, and even in the dialogue there'd be a block. So I think the way it came about was there were pages came that had changes from Chris, asterisks on my daily work, and I was looking at it and I was like, I don't see the change. I couldn't see a change. It looked exactly the same to me. So I called Chris, or I saw Chris, and I said, what's the change that you're looking for? Because I don't see it. And he said, no, I just had to correct the widows and the orphans. And I said, wait a minute. So what you're saying is like, every time I have a dialogue block, it has to be a perfect block. And he's like, yes. And I said, so all these years, you've been writing ... I've been taking pauses because I think Mulder's having a thought. What's really happening is Chris is trying to make it a block.
I think that happened very late in our,
It did.
our relationship.
It took me 12 years to find that out. 12 seasons of Mulder going,
Dash.
oh, the dashes. Yeah. Anyway, so I think it's a beautiful story.
CD.
You make it work for you.
All right, here we go. How many people have read the book?
Oh, please.
Well,
Well, it's short. I'll give you time. Let's go on.
We're going to take a short break. Okay, well, so the thing I was afraid of were spoilers. So I'm going
Don't worry about that.
I'm going to be careful with spoilers because the book is kind of a mystery. Anyway, I found the book, and as you know, I think I've spoken to you about it at length, funny, ironic, wry, and perceptive, and definitely smarter than I am. Anyway, the character's name is Ridley, as David said, and we find him alone in his apartment with his martinis. He's got no significant relationship with his daughter, his grandkids, his ex-wife. He imagines himself an artist with a cell phone. Is he pathetic or merely sad and lonely?
Is that a question? Well, it's a good question because I think in the beginning when I started writing it, I was writing a pathetic guy that I was satirizing. And then he became sad and lonely as I went along. As I began, and I'm sure you've had this experience when you're writing that characters start to almost advocate for themselves. You know, it's weird. It's weird how that happens in fiction or in dramatic writing. So he started to advocate for himself as a, he started saying, like, stop making fun of me. Take me seriously, Dave.
A life of his own.
Yeah, he took on a life of his own, and I started to respect that and tried to ride that out. And so in the beginning I would think, pathetic, and it
And then
changed.
he changed it to,
He changed me.
yeah,
He changed my opinion of him. Yeah.
mine too. But as I said, Ridley imagines himself an artist. He questions whether he's an artist at all. He's a Wall Street man, as you said, but concludes that he is an artist and that the virus is speaking through him like a ventriloquist. Explain that a little bit.
I think what I mean by that is that a writer needs an event. A lot of people would say, of the generation after World War II that they had, it was a tragedy, of course, but they had that war. They had service to write about. They had a big event, and Ridley has had this inkling that he's an artistic soul, but he's always worked on Wall Street, and he's made his 9-to-5 money, and he's raised a family. He hasn't had an event. And I think it's like great tragedies or great events. If you're a vessel of some kind of an interpretive vessel, artistic vessel, then they speak through you, and people learn about it through you. And what folds back for him, it folds back to 9/11, which to me, in my adulthood, 9/11 and the pandemic were the great tragic events, and they're kind of twinned in this book. And that was not something that I had planned on doing. And in fact, when I chose Ridley as a Wall Streeter, I didn't know that he was there at 9/11. And that also came about as a surprise, that he was down there on that day.
So you really had no idea how the book was going to end when you started it?
No, I thought I kind of had the template of Death in Venice, that he would be drawn out of his isolation into a plague-ridden city, and because of some kind of sexual attraction or attraction to mystery, he was going to endanger his own life. But I didn't know anything else, really. I just wanted to set up that question and then see where it led.
The book starts with a view out over the reservoir, and you talk about the reservoir being the reason that the character bought his apartment, principally. And would you say that's a
Guilty.
safe view?
Yes, guilty. Yes. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I walked into that apartment and I was like, okay, well, I mean, the thing about New York is that it's very cramped, right? It's vertical. And I didn't grow up, well, I actually did grow up with a view on 11th Street, 2nd Avenue. I had a view of a graveyard, which explains a lot.
A Dutch graveyard?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, that's great. Peter Stuyvesant was buried there. And Mulder is Chris's mother's maiden name, and that's a Dutch name. And so I grew up with an interesting view from New York, for sure. A weird view. There's no graveyards in New York, really. It's the only one is on St. Mark's there, in the middle of the city. And so anyway, just to see the park open up when I walked into that apartment was everything to me. It felt like it was bigger than it was. The apartment was expansive. You've never been?
I've never, well, I feel like I've been because I've seen some of the...
I would send Chris time lapses.
Yes, the book, I don't know if David described how beautiful these time-lapse photographs he takes are of the reservoir and the skyline beyond. And, they bloom like flowers. And he would send them to me occasionally. And
I was trying to get him to buy my apartment.
yeah, exactly. Didn't work. Ridley, he calls this art that he's making his legacy.
Yeah.
He actually thinks he's going to do something with it, or it's going going to appear somewhere, or it's going to define him. And I think it's really comes out of the pandemic, but actually considering social media and TikTok, et cetera, couldn't you say that the pandemic actually created a lot of artists?
Yeah, I suppose you can. And I think we have like a wild west of expression and content out there. And I think in his own middle-aged way, he thinks, his understanding of it is I'll be able to, I think he says, get a YouTube channel or something like that. And he doesn't say TikTok. I think I wrote it before TikTok. But yeah, he's thinking like that. He's thinking like, I have something to say, or the virus has something to say through me, or I've been made eloquent by this suffering, and I'm gonna find a venue for it, which has been made possible in the last 10 years of the internet.
Doesn't he have like an apartment, the decathlon that he does, where he runs 100 steps?
Triathlon. That's the exercise. I don't know if you all, well, in LA, you're less confined, but I had him thinking that, he had three ways to exercise. There was to walk from the kitchen to the living room, which was the sprint. There was the walk from the kitchen to the bathroom, which was the middle distance. And then I forget what the marathon was. It was, kitchen to a back bedroom somewhere. And that's basically, his events. But that's just like, it's all, that was the amazing thing about lockdown, at least for me in New York, was that everything was happening on my screen. The world was on fire and falling apart, dying. And every day had a million things to process, politically, socially, globally. Nothing was happening in my apartment. I never went out. So this vertigo of like, my life is completely circumscribed. And yet the world outside is completely undone. And I was kind of trying to give voice to that kind of whiplash. I think we're still there in a way, some way.
That's my next question. The narrative is actually quite simple in the book, but the story's complex. Ridley confabulates for days on end. Is this a kind of madness?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think again, going back to the lockdown was like, yeah, you were trapped with your thoughts. You were trapped with your mind, and this is a guy who's not having any human contact really. So he's looking back on his life and trying to figure out some mistakes, what he's responsible for, what was done to him, and what he did to others. Mostly the stuff with his daughter, how to make up with his daughter, because he's not seeing his daughter because he's afraid that her kids are not going to follow the rules and mask. And at some point he said, I don't want your kids to kill me. And his daughter is rightfully upset about that, although understanding. But they haven't really patched it up since then, since the beginning of the pandemic. And this is his wound. That's like his major wound there. That's the wound that's at the, on the one hand, it's a guy who thinks he's going to solve all the mysteries of the world, and the QAnon, and the ballots, and the 9/11, all of it. It's all underneath the reservoir, and he's going to find it. But really, the emotional impetus for it all, underneath the big mystery of the world, is always like, it's Rosebud, it's always like the personal thing. And for him, it's this rupture with his daughter, which does get resolved in some way. I said in some way. Okay, all right. Nobody dies. Everybody dies.